Welcome to MSL Stories. Friends, if you don't mind, please subscribe to my channel. I have a dream of 1,000 subscribers. Thank you. Let's start the story. I jolted awake when my phone buzzed under my pillow. My heart pounded because any call at that hour usually signals catastrophe. Instead, my mother's voice filtered through the darkness, quivering with desperation. She never bothered to phone me once in 3 years, and now she dared ring at 2 in the morning. I didn't even pretend to be polite. I set the phone down halfway through her plea for help, eyes fixed on the ceiling, annoyance twisting my stomach. My life took a surreal turn several years ago, the day I saw my own mother walk through the front door with gifts for all the children in our family, except for my son, Jeremy. He was 5 at the time, wide-eyed and hopeful, unaware that my parents often played favorites. My sister Tori had 2 children, and each of them was showered with expensive electronics, brand new sneakers, and gift cards. My boy got nothing, not even a used coloring book. I still remember the little gasp Jeremy made when he realized he'd been overlooked. My anger flared, and I demanded an explanation. My mother waved me off with an irritated expression, dropping some line about how I had more money than Tori, so I didn't need anything from her. I come from a strange household. My father, Carl, spent decades as a warehouse manager. My mother, Linda, stayed at home throughout most of my childhood. She liked to call herself a caring homemaker, though in truth she was always meddling in other people's lives. Tori, now 33, thrived under that meddling. She hasn't worked in over 5 years, claiming she's too busy with daily life. Meanwhile, her husband Joel sends a huge slice of his meager paychecks to his ex-wife for child support. My parents always leap to bail them out, covering everything from Tori's grocery bills to her car payments. On paper, it's the same old story. One child is favored, the other is cast aside. On that awful Christmas, I decided I was done. I dragged my husband Glenn and my son out of my parents' living room, ignoring my mother's shocked expression. She hurled an insult about me being ungrateful. I shut the door behind us and stayed silent until we reached the car. Jeremy was confused. Glenn was fuming. The next day, I blocked my mother's number. 3 entire years passed without a single phone call or text from her, until that jarring late-night ring. I didn't need details to guess the reason for her contact. I'd heard on the grapevine that my father was laid off, so they must be short on funds. With Tori's freeloading, there's no one left to cover her rent or her kids' after-school programs. Now, apparently, I was needed, so I was expected to forgive and open my checkbook. I wasn't always so cold. I used to be the type of person who believed in second chances, who strove to keep peace in the family. That changed after I discovered Glenn's betrayal, a betrayal that rocked me almost as much as my mother's cruelty. In hindsight, his disloyalty was obvious. For months, Glenn's phone would buzz late at night. He'd slip off to the bathroom and claim urgent emails from clients. I work as an analyst for a financial firm, so I know how to read small signs, but I convinced myself I was mistaken. Jeremy had begun full-day classes, so we were no longer drowning in babysitter schedules. We shared a comfortable house and a decent income. On paper, everything looked stable. Underneath, something corrosive ate away at the foundation. I unraveled the truth about Glenn one ordinary Tuesday. I'd wrapped up a meeting at my office around 3 in the afternoon and noticed missed calls from an unknown number. When I returned home, I found Glenn's phone on the kitchen counter. A message lit up its screen. "You left your scarf in my car." I recognized the name on the text as a woman from Glenn's workplace. Her name was Morgan, and she was the lead project coordinator at Glenn's engineering firm. She was around 29, newly hired, still in that honeymoon phase at the company. I hadn't thought twice about her in the past. I suspected she might be the reason Glenn's gaze drifted away whenever I brought up weekend plans. I confronted him later that night. He claimed it was harmless, that they were carpooling to a conference. My instincts told me otherwise, so I decided to collect proof. Our marriage lacked the spark it once had, though I thought that happened in many relationships over time. I might have accepted it if not for the crushing disappointment around Jeremy's own experiences with betrayal. I already felt stung by my mother's favoritism, and the mere possibility of Glenn's disloyalty lit a fierce determination in me. I wasn't about to let him secretly push me aside and humiliate me. I confided in someone unexpected. Debbie, my coworker who had been my silent ally for years. She was 40, originally from Oregon, newly divorced from a man who cheated on her. She volunteered to help gather details. Debbie and I designed a straightforward plan. She posed as a consulting agent interested in Glenn's firm. She emailed Morgan, requesting a casual lunch to discuss potential expansions. The goal? See how Morgan responded and whether Glenn's name came up in questionable ways. Debbie's lunch meeting with Morgan took place at a bustling cafe near the engineering firm. An hour later, Debbie called me with a sense of triumph in her voice. Morgan had casually shown off photos on her phone, including images of her and Glenn at a private cabin upstate. The pictures told a clear story. The two of them shared an entire weekend together. My face burned with anger when Debbie confirmed what I'd been fearing for months. I knew there was no turning back. I confronted Glenn directly that evening. He tried to deny it until I threatened to send those very photos to his boss, who's notoriously strict about inter-office relationships. The color drained from Glenn's cheeks. He muttered half-baked excuses, claiming I'd neglected him, or that stress in our marriage drove him to confide in Morgan. I wasn't interested in apologies. I gave him one night to pack. No negotiations, no therapy, no frantic attempts to hold on. He left with a single suitcase, stuttering as he asked if I was sure. I responded with a single nod and shut the door. That same week, I filed for divorce. Glenn's paycheck was modest because my income dwarfed his. He was the creative engineer, while I specialized in high-level investment strategies and earned a far larger salary. If he thought I would quietly fade away after he broke our vows, he was sorely mistaken. My lawyer, Caleb Pierce, was known for fierce negotiation tactics, especially in contested divorces. I gave him free rein to ensure Glenn left with as little as possible. We mapped out a plan. Spousal support from me would be minimal if I proved Glenn's infidelity. State laws where we live allow consideration of misconduct when deciding alimony. When Glenn eventually realized how thoroughly I intended to fight, he tried to backtrack. Morgan was no longer worth the financial fallout. I gave him a sardonic grin when he asked for a second chance. Nothing else needed to be said. The divorce process took months. During that time, the rest of my family learned bits of what was happening. My mother took Glenn's side, probably just to spite me. She claimed I was unreasonable and that I never tried to work things out. Tori was indifferent. In fact, she may have found amusement in my marital drama. While I juggled attorneys and depositions, Tori's only text to me read, "Stop making everything about you. Mom's worried and you're ignoring her." I blocked Tori's number right after. I already had enough nonsense on my plate. During the depositions, Glenn tried to argue that our marriage was broken long before Morgan entered the picture. His attorney said I was cold, dismissive, and that I frequently traveled for business. Caleb challenged every statement, brandishing Morgan's photos and time-stamped receipts for their secret trips. I felt oddly calm through it all. If Glenn wanted to drag me through the mud, I'd haul him through the entire swamp. While the legal process churned, life for Tori and my parents continued. Tori and her husband Joel had grown accustomed to having my parents pay for every little expense. My father's job had always been stable enough to cover Tori's demands. But then Dad was laid off. Suddenly, they couldn't shield Tori from her overdue rent and bills. Family gossip suggested that Tori started skipping appointments for her kids, and Joel's ex-wife demanded consistent support payments. With no steady cushion from my parents, Tori's finances collapsed quickly. My mother reached out to every relative possible, painting Tori as a victim in dire straits. Most of my extended relatives either refused or pretended not to have extra money. Then, seeing no other option, my mother circled back to me, which brings us to the phone call at 2 a.m. The desperation in her voice was tangible, but it triggered memories of that Christmas. I recalled Jeremy's face, brimming with sadness as everyone else unwrapped gifts. I recalled how my mother's words cut into me, telling me I had enough, so it didn't matter if my son got nothing. No part of me felt the slightest inclination to help them now. So, after a few seconds of hearing my mother ramble, I placed the phone on my nightstand and let her voice fade into the darkness. She wanted money to bail out Tori and Joel again. She implied, in a text message afterward, that it was my duty. She threw in an insult for good measure, calling me ungrateful. I found it laughable. Then I blocked her. A few days after that night, I decided that a final act of retribution was overdue. I was already severing ties with Glenn in a harsh but legal manner. My lawyer was preparing a final hearing to finalize our divorce. Meanwhile, my mother and Tori were the ones still holding on to the fantasy that I'd come running to help. That needed to end. I'd put up with too much all these years, from the blatant favoritism to the emotional manipulation. I started with the mother who took my sister's side no matter what. My father might have been complicit, but I always suspected he just followed her lead. She's the decision-maker in that household. I decided to add a public dimension to the family drama. Normally, I dislike broadcasting private matters, but in this case, I wanted to ensure everyone understood why I would never again lend my parents money or emotional support. I invited a handful of extended relatives to a small gathering at a local restaurant known for family-style lunches. I played it casual, telling them it was simply a chance to catch up, and for me to share some important news about the next chapter in my life. Once they arrived, I explained everything. I described the Christmas fiasco that alienated Jeremy. I recounted my mother's choice to break contact and then suddenly demand money. I handed out copies of a letter I'd prepared, detailing how Tori and Joel had been living off my parents, how my father's layoff left them all in crisis, and how my mother only now remembered I existed. I also appended a short statement on Glenn's infidelity, just enough details to clarify that I was ending a dishonest relationship. I wanted a clean break from every toxic link in my life. Some relatives wore shocked expressions. Others nodded as though they'd suspected something all along. A few even told me they were relieved to see I was taking control of my life. The entire family had known about Tori's manipulative ways for years, but many were too polite to address it. By speaking openly, I exposed the entire structure of favoritism my mother had created. I left that lunch gathering feeling more empowered than I had in years. That same day, I contacted an employment agency and made an anonymous tip about Tori's husband. Joel had boasted in the past about underreporting his income to reduce child support payments to his ex-wife. It was a petty secret he carelessly admitted during a family barbecue once, complete with a proud smirk. I remembered every detail, and I turned that memory into formal paperwork. The moment the agency and the legal system took a closer look, Joel would be in trouble for falsifying records. I considered it the smallest portion of the payback they all had coming. They wanted to treat me and Jeremy like outsiders, so I saw no reason to protect Joel from the consequences of his own wrongdoing. While I moved forward with these steps, Glenn continued to squirm in the divorce. He tried to delay the proceedings, probably hoping I'd get worn out and settle for less. My lawyer and I pressed forward. Each time Glenn's lawyer requested another extension, we countered with more evidence of his misconduct. Eventually, Glenn realized the judge wasn't going to be lenient. We reached an agreement that left him with minimal assets. I was awarded our main property and majority custody of Jeremy. Glenn was granted standard visitation every other weekend. He sulked in the courtroom hallway, exchanging hushed words with Morgan, who sat by his side with a stiff posture. The final divorce decree arrived in the mail a week later. With the legal side handled, I decided it was time for the finishing move, setting boundaries for all those who presumed I'd keep quiet. My mother texted me from different phone numbers, repeatedly insisting that I had a responsibility to help Tori. I decided to respond once so there would be no confusion. I stated that she could not contact me again unless she wanted to apologize to Jeremy in person for ignoring him all those years. I wrote that no part of me would funnel money to my sister or bail her out of her overdue bills. Then I blocked every new number she tried. I wanted her to experience the isolation she had inflicted on me. Maybe 3 more years without contact would help her see the pattern, but I wouldn't hold my breath. A month later, I heard that Tori and Joel were on the verge of eviction. My father attempted to negotiate a personal loan from some old friends to save Tori, but no one was willing to co-sign with him. That same father tried to approach me in a grocery store parking lot, shoulders slumped, face drawn. He asked if we could talk privately. I let him speak. He said my mother was stressed, Tori was overwhelmed, and they simply wanted to mend the family. I told him that if they needed a conversation to heal old wounds, they should have thought of that years ago, before humiliating Jeremy on the day that was supposed to unite our family. There's a piece of me that wonders if my father regrets letting my mother dictate everything. Either way, I wasn't budging. I calmly said no, then drove away. In my rearview mirror, I saw him stand there, eyes downcast. I used to want some form of genuine reconciliation, but that ended when they decided my child wasn't worthy of a simple Christmas gift. Meanwhile, the tip about Joel's underreported income led to a formal investigation. He faced legal consequences and had to pay back several $1,000s in missed child support, plus penalties for providing false information. Their finances, already on thin ice, collapsed further. Tori would complain to anyone who listened, saying I was living a lavish life while they suffered. She neglected to mention the years of parental favoritism she had enjoyed, or the rude remarks toward me when Glenn cheated, or the dismissive shrugs whenever I reached out in the past. Those days were over. If I learned anything from these events, it's that revenge isn't always about an impulsive strike. Sometimes it's about carefully aligning everything so those who harmed you are left with nothing to prop them up. Glenn lost our house, ended up with a massive legal bill, and had to move into a cramped condo with Morgan, who soon realized she was now financially responsible for him. My sister lost her safety net and faced accountability for the lifestyle she never earned. My parents' illusions about Tori being the golden child were shattered by the sudden withdrawal of everyone's sympathy, and I emerged from the rubble financially stable, with full custody of Jeremy and a sense of calm I never knew I craved. Let me be very clear, I'm not ashamed of the path I chose. It's easy to claim people should always take the moral high ground, but I was finished being a scapegoat. My mother tried to paint me as an ungrateful daughter, ignoring years of manipulative behavior. Glenn tried to depict me as cold-hearted when he was the one sneaking around in a mountain cabin with his co-worker. Tori acted helpless while sponging off everyone around her. Each of them participated in my misery. They used to walk all over me, believing I'd always remain the quiet, compliant one. Their illusions ended the day I decided to act. I'd love to say everything is sunshine and roses now. Life still has difficulties. Jeremy sometimes asks why he barely sees his grandparents. I explain that sometimes grown-ups make big mistakes that hurt people, and we need distance to protect ourselves. As for Glenn's visitation, Jeremy enjoys occasional weekends, though Glenn's new partner rarely tries to bond with him, which spares me from awkward transitions. My father tried once more to meet with me, hoping for a patch-up. I kept the conversation polite but short, making it clear the boundaries aren't changing. My mother never apologized, so I didn't attend family gatherings the following holidays. I heard from relatives that Tori's kids noticed the difference, but I'm past worrying about that. I have my own child to prioritize. One afternoon, I took Jeremy out to the local park. He was running around with a few of his friends while I sipped coffee at a bench. I felt a weight lift off my chest for the first time in ages. My home was peaceful. I was free from a cheater who tried to manipulate me. I was removed from a family that never saw my worth. Watching Jeremy squeal with delight on the slides, I felt a surge of gratitude for this new reality. Maybe there was a time I would have tried to keep the family together, or salvage the marriage, or pay for Tori's rent just to earn my mother's approval. Thankfully, that version of me no longer exists. Some might ask if I have regrets about how far my revenge went. I don't. Each step was a logical response to the harm they inflicted. Glenn lied and broke our vows, so I extracted what was fair through legal means. My sister took advantage of our parents' pocketbook and tried to shame me, so I severed all financial ties and exposed Joel's scams. My mother attempted to guilt me into financing Tori's life, so I made it crystal clear she would never again be allowed to manipulate me or my son. They're left with the consequences, and I'm free of their burdens. From here on, my focus is on Jeremy and on building the life I want. Work is challenging, but rewarding. I've taken on a new project at my financial firm, analyzing large-scale mergers. Debbie still checks in on me, always thrilled that we pulled off the plan to expose Glenn's affair. I could see her bruised spirit healing as well, since she found a measure of justice in helping me discover Morgan's role. Maybe she found closure for her own experience with infidelity. If my mother tries to reach me in another 3 years, or in 30, I have no doubt it will be about the same topic. Money for Tori. Perhaps Tori will find a job, or maybe she'll sink further. It's not my problem. My father had a chance to step up and do what was right for Jeremy long ago, and he didn't. Glenn will do the standard visitation routine, but that's all I need him for. I'm content with that arrangement. There's no tearful reconciliation in this story. Instead, there's a final hush that descends when toxic people lose control. That hush is what I hear every day in my home, where my son and I enjoy our life without the constant disruption of a cheating spouse or a manipulative family. If that's not the sweetest revenge, I don't know what is. I place the phone on silent now before bed. No more late-night calls will intrude on my peace. If they do slip through, they'll be met with the same unwavering response, silence or a swift no. I carved out this serenity, and I'm not giving it up. Thank you, friends.